July 28, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The metal cart rolled across the compound yard, making a sound Greta Hoffman hadn't heard in 3 years. A musical tinkling, ice against metal, bells chiming. She looked up from the laundry line where she'd been hanging American uniforms to dry in the brutal heat. The cart was white, gleaming in the sun, pushed by an American soldier who was whistling. 37 German women stopped what they were doing. The cart had wheels that squeaked. Steam rose from its top. No, not steam. Cold, vapor. In this heat, something inside that cart was so cold it was making the air around it visible. Greta's hands tightened on the wet shirt she'd been holding. Water dripped onto her boots. She didn't notice. The soldier pushed the cart to the center of the yard and called out in broken German, "Dessert! Who wants dessert?" Nobody moved. Dessert. The word felt foreign, like something from another lifetime. Before the war, before the shortages, before bread became sawdust and coffee became roasted acorns. The soldier opened the cart's lid. More cold vapor poured out, rolling down the sides like fog. He reached inside with a metal scoop. When he lifted it out, Greta's breath caught. Color. Pink. Impossible, bright, almost violent pink against the white of the scoop. Soft. Mounded, already beginning to melt in the Louisiana sun, dripping in slow rivulets down the metal. "Strawberry ice cream?" the soldier announced. "Who's first?" The women stood frozen. Some literally had their mouths open. Elizabeth, a 19-year-old girl from Hamburg who'd been a telephone operator, took a step forward, then stopped. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Is this real?" The soldier laughed, not cruel, genuinely amused. "Real as it gets. Come on, it's melting." Elizabeth walked forward like someone approaching something dangerous. The soldier handed her a small bowl. Pink ice cream, already pooling at the bottom. A metal spoon. She held it like she'd been given something alive. Greta watched Elizabeth lift the spoon to her lips with a shaking hand, watched her open her mouth, watched the pink spoon disappear inside. Elizabeth's eyes went wide. Then she made a sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Something in between. The spoon clattered against the bowl. Her free hand flew to her mouth. Tears started running down her face, fast, sudden, like something had broken inside her. "Cold," she whispered. "It's so cold." Then she started crying, really crying, shoulders shaking, the ice cream melting in her hand, forgotten. Greta felt something twist in her chest. The soldier looked alarmed. "Is she okay? Did I—" But Elizabeth was already eating again. Spoon to mouth, tears still streaming, eating and crying simultaneously. The pink ice cream smeared at the corner of her lips. "More," she said between sobs. "Please. More." The soldier, confused but willing, gave her another scoop. Greta stepped forward. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. "I'll have some." Her voice didn't sound like her own. 3 months earlier, Greta had been captured near Cologne. Radio operator, 24 years old, university educated. The Americans had processed her through camps in France, then shipped her across an ocean to a country so vast it made Germany feel like a postage stamp. Camp Ruston sat in northern Louisiana, surrounded by pine forests and humidity so thick you could chew it. The heat was relentless. The food was abundant. The treatment was correct, careful, meticulous, following Geneva Convention protocols with precision that felt almost robotic. For 3 months, Greta had eaten better than she had in the final 2 years of the war. White bread, real coffee, meat that wasn't mystery protein scraped from bone and hoof. But dessert? Dessert was something from childhood, birthday cakes before sugar rationing, Christmas stolen when butter still existed. Dessert belonged to a world that had ended somewhere between 1942 and 1943, when total war became the only war, when every resource went to the front, when pleasure became treason. Now the soldier was handing her a bowl. The ice cream was pink and white swirled together, strawberry and vanilla. It was already melting, the edges going soft and liquid. A drop fell from the scoop and landed on her wrist. Cold, shockingly cold, like nothing she'd felt in this sweltering camp. She lifted the spoon. The ice cream came away in a smooth scoop, softer than she'd expected, almost cloud-like. She put it in her mouth. The cold hit first. So cold it hurt her teeth, made her jaw ache. Then the sweetness, overwhelming, almost painful in its intensity. Sugar. Real sugar. Not saccharin, not the ersatz sweeteners that tasted like chemicals. Sugar that exploded on her tongue like something alive. The strawberry taste came next. Bright. Artificial somehow, but also deeply, perfectly strawberry. A flavor she'd forgotten existed. She closed her eyes. The ice cream melted immediately in her mouth. Cold became liquid, became sweet, became memory. Summer before the war, her mother's kitchen, fresh strawberries in a bowl. Cream so thick it left mustaches on her little brother's face. Her brother was dead, killed on the Eastern Front in 1944. Greta opened her eyes. The ice cream in her bowl was melting fast in the heat, pink and white bleeding together, becoming soup. She took another spoonful, and another. Around her, more women were approaching the cart. The soldier was serving them with the slightly bewildered expression of someone who'd expected gratitude and was getting something more complicated. Helga Schmidt, a practical woman from Bavaria who'd driven supply trucks, took her bowl and immediately sat down on the ground. She ate methodically, scraping every molecule from the bowl, then licking the spoon clean. When she finished, she stared at the empty bowl for a long time. Frau Kessler, an older woman who'd worked in military administration and maintained an iron loyalty to the regime despite everything, refused to approach the cart. She stood apart, arms crossed, face hard. "It's a trick," she announced. "They're softening us, making us weak." But her eyes stayed on the ice cream cart. Elizabeth had gotten thirds. She sat on the barracks steps, eating slowly now, savoring. Her face was still wet with tears, but she was smiling, a strange, broken smile that looked almost painful. "I forgot," she said to no one in particular. "I forgot things could taste like this." The soldier serving the ice cream was maybe 22, blonde, sunburned, with the easy posture of someone who'd never known real hunger. He kept glancing at the women, clearly disturbed by their reactions. Finally, he asked Greta, the only one who seemed remotely composed, "Did I do something wrong?" Greta looked at him, at his honest confusion, at the ice cream cart with its impossible luxury, at the women around her eating and crying and laughing and breaking in ways that had nothing to do with cruelty. "No," she said quietly, "you did something kind. That's the problem." He didn't understand. How could he? That evening, after the ice cream cart had been wheeled away and the women had returned to their normal routines, Greta sat in her bunk, writing in the diary she'd somehow managed to keep through capture and transport. Her hand moved slowly across the page. July 28th, 1945. They gave us ice cream today, strawberry and vanilla. I don't know how to explain what happened. Elizabeth cried so hard she got hiccups. Helga ate 3 bowls and then couldn't speak for an hour. Even she paused. What had happened to her? The ice cream had been cold and sweet and perfect. That was the problem. It had been perfect. In a world that had been nothing but broken and burnt and desperate for years, the Americans had given them something perfect. And it was just Tuesday, just a random Tuesday in July, not a holiday, not a special occasion. Just dessert, because it was hot outside. The casual nature of it was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. Greta put down her pen and looked around the barracks. The other women were having similar struggles. Elizabeth was lying on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her lips kept moving, like she was trying to remember the taste, trying to hold on to it before it vanished like a dream. Helga sat on the floor near the window, her hands folded in her lap, absolutely still. She'd been that way for 2 hours. Even Frau Kessler, who'd refused the ice cream, who'd called it a trick, sat in the corner with an expression that looked almost like grief. "My children," she said suddenly. Her voice was flat. My children in Berlin are eating potato peels, if they're lucky, and I just watched you eat strawberry ice cream like it was nothing." No one responded. What could they say? The truth sat in the barracks like a third presence. They were eating better as prisoners of war than their families were eating as free citizens of Germany. Later that night, unable to sleep in the humid darkness, Greta went to the latrine and found Elizabeth there, bent over a sink, washing her face. "Can't sleep?" Greta asked. Elizabeth looked up. Her eyes were red. "I keep tasting it. The ice cream. It won't go away. I know. Why did it make me cry like that?" Elizabeth's voice was desperate, pleading. "It was just frozen milk and sugar. Why did it feel like—" She couldn't finish. Greta understood. The ice cream had felt like proof that the world they'd been told about, the world where Germany was strong and America was weak, where the Reich would triumph and democracy would collapse, was a lie. Ice cream, casual, abundant, given to prisoners on a hot Tuesday. That kind of abundance didn't come from weakness. "I want to go home," Elizabeth whispered, "but I'm afraid to go home. Because home doesn't have ice cream anymore, maybe it never will again." The ice cream cart came back 3 days later. This time, the flavors were different. Chocolate, vanilla, something the soldier called butter pecan that none of the women had ever heard of. Greta took chocolate. The color alone was stunning. Dark, rich brown, almost black. Real chocolate, not the ersatz stuff that had tasted like wax and sadness. The first bite was different from the strawberry. Deeper, more complex. The chocolate flavor coated her tongue, her teeth, the roof of her mouth. It was cold and sweet and bitter all at once. She ate it standing in the shade of the barracks, watching the other women. Elizabeth had gotten vanilla this time. She ate it slowly, eyes closed, completely absorbed in the sensation. No crying this time, just silence, reverence. Helga tried the butter pecan, made a face at the chunks of nuts, then kept eating anyway. "Strange," she muttered. "Why put nuts in ice cream?" An American guard standing nearby, a woman named Corporal Davis with kind eyes and permanent sweat stains on her uniform, laughed. "That's what makes it good, the texture." The conversation was brief, casual, but something about it struck Greta. The American woman guard was having a normal conversation about ice cream flavors with German prisoners of war. Like it was normal, like they were just women talking about dessert preferences, not enemies, not guard and captive, just women who had opinions about whether nuts belonged in frozen dessert. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. That evening, during recreation time, a group of women gathered in the shade of the mess hall to talk. The conversation inevitably turned to ice cream. "I had butter pecan," announced Gertrude Mann, a former secretary from Stuttgart. "It's growing on me. The nuts add something." "Vanilla is the purest," Elizabeth argued. "You can taste the quality, no hiding behind flavors." "Chocolate is clearly superior," Helga said. "Richer, more substantial." Greta listened to them debate ice cream flavors, with the seriousness of scholars discussing philosophy. She wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. These were women who'd served the Wehrmacht, who'd been part of the war machine, who'd believed in the cause, or at least believed in Germany. Now they were ranking ice cream flavors in an American prison camp while their homeland lay in ruins. The absurdity was perfect and terrible. Frau Kessler appeared at the edge of the group. She'd been avoiding everyone since refusing the ice cream. Now she stood there, arms still crossed, face still hard. "You should be ashamed," she said. The conversation stopped. "Sitting here," Frau Kessler continued, "discussing ice cream preferences like you're at a cafe in peacetime, while German children starve, while our cities burn, while everything we fought for turns to ash." Elizabeth's face went white, but Helga stood up. She was shorter than Frau Kessler, but somehow looked bigger. "What would you have us do? Refuse to eat? Starve ourselves in solidarity? Would that rebuild Dresden? Would that bring back the dead?" "It would preserve your dignity." "Dignity! Helga's laugh was sharp. Is there dignity in pretending, in refusing to see what's right in front of us? And what's that? That we lost. Completely, totally, absolutely lost. That everything we were told was a lie. That the Americans feed their prisoners better than we fed our own people. That ice cream, stupid, frivolous, unnecessary ice cream, proves more about the war than any battle ever could. Frau Kessler's face went rigid. You're a traitor? No, I'm awake, finally, and it hurts like hell, but at least I'm seeing clearly. The older woman turned and walked away, spine straight, refusing to bend. Greta watched her go and felt a strange pity. Frau Kessler was clinging to the old certainties because letting go meant facing something too terrible to accept. They'd been on the wrong side, not just militarily, morally. The ice cream was proof of American industrial might. But more than that, it was proof of a system that could produce abundance even during war. That could afford to give frozen dessert to prisoners. That could be casually, thoughtlessly wealthy. Germany had mobilized every resource, stripped every luxury, demanded total sacrifice, and still lost. America had ice cream. The equation was brutally simple. August became September. September became October. The ice cream cart became a regular feature of camp life. Every few days, on hot afternoons, it would appear. Different flavors. Sometimes new things. Orange sherbet that was too tart, mint chocolate chip that was too strange, rocky road that had actual marshmallows. The women learned their preferences, developed favorites, debated the merits of different combinations. They also learned something else. The American guards didn't care. The ice cream wasn't a reward for good behavior. It wasn't conditional. It was just given because it was hot, because ice cream existed, because why not? That casualness was revolutionary. In October, Greta received her first letter from home. It had taken 5 months to reach her through Red Cross channels. The handwriting was her mother's, but shakier than Greta remembered. The letter described Berlin in the fall of 1945. Rubble, shortages, ration cards that promised food but delivered hunger. Her mother's careful avoidance of complaints. We are managing, we make do. Made it worse somehow. Then, at the end, I hope you are being treated well. I hope you have enough to eat. I worry about you constantly. Greta sat holding the letter, thinking about strawberry ice cream melting in the July heat, about chocolate coating her tongue, about Elizabeth crying from the sweetness of something cold. She couldn't write back about the ice cream, couldn't explain. The gulf between her mother's reality and her own was too vast. Instead, she wrote, I am well. The Americans follow the rules. I have enough to eat. All true. All completely inadequate. Repatriation began in November. The war had been over for months, but organizing the return of millions of displaced persons took time. Processing, paperwork, transport, logistics. Greta's group was scheduled for February 1946. On her last day at Camp Ruston, the ice cream cart appeared one final time. The soldier, the same young blonde man who'd served the first impossible strawberry scoops back in July, recognized some of the women. Last call for ice cream before you go home, ladies, he announced in his broken German. Greta took vanilla. Simple. Pure. The flavor that Elizabeth had called purest all those months ago. She ate it slowly, standing in the weak winter sunlight that even Louisiana couldn't make warm in February. The cold was different now, less shocking, more familiar, but still perfect, still sweet. Around her, the women ate their final American ice cream in silence. Even Frau Kessler had gotten in line. She'd finally broken in January after a particularly brutal letter from her daughter describing conditions in occupied Berlin. She'd taken one small scoop of vanilla and eaten it with her eyes closed, crying silently. Now she had chocolate. She ate it mechanically, like taking medicine. The journey back to Germany took 3 weeks, ship to Le Havre, then trains through France into the occupied zones. Greta watched the landscape pass outside the train windows, countryside that still bore scars from fighting, cities rebuilding from rubble. They crossed into Germany on a gray March morning. The devastation was total. Cologne was a moonscape. Frankfurt was ruins. Berlin was bombed flat. The train moved slowly through a country that barely resembled the one Greta had left. Stuttgart, her home, was damaged but standing. The city had survived better than many. Her family's apartment building had lost its roof, but the walls held. Her mother opened the door and pulled Greta inside, holding her like she might disappear. She'd lost. Wait. Everyone had. Her face was gaunt, her hands thin and cold. That evening, sitting in the kitchen lit by a single kerosene lamp, no electricity yet in their district, her mother asked, "Was it terrible? The Americans?" Greta thought about how to answer that question, about ice cream on hot July afternoons, about flavors she'd never imagined, about casual abundance and mechanical kindness and possible pink of strawberry against white metal, the cold that hurt her teeth, the sweetness that made Elizabeth cry. Then she'd explain, "That ice cream wasn't just dessert. It was a demonstration of American industrial capacity, of systematic abundance, of a nation so wealthy it could afford to give luxury items to prisoners of war. While Germany," she'd continue, "had been telling us we were winning, that we were superior, that the enemy was weak and decadent and would collapse, and then the enemy gave us ice cream, casually, on a Tuesday, because it was hot." She'd pause. Let that sink in. The ice cream told the truth when propaganda couldn't. It showed us what we'd been fighting, not weakness, not decadence, but abundance so vast it seemed magical to people who'd forgotten what luxury tasted like. In 1978, a filmmaker documenting German POW experiences interviewed Greta. The interviewer asked, "What moment from your captivity stuck with you most?" Greta didn't hesitate. "The ice cream. Not the capture, not the processing, not the journey home. No, the ice cream, because it was the moment I understood we'd lost years before the surrender. We'd lost when we chose a system that promised glory but delivered hunger, when we believed strength meant sacrifice instead of understanding that real strength looks like ice cream on a Tuesday." The interviewer pressed, "But ice cream is such a small thing." "Exactly," Greta said. "That's the point. It was small, insignificant, casual, and that casualness, that ability to provide frozen dessert to prisoners without even thinking it was remarkable, that was the real power." She leaned forward. "The ice cream didn't torture us, didn't starve us, didn't break our bodies, but it broke something else. It broke the lie that we'd been strong, that we'd been fighting for something valuable, that we'd been on the right side. Because when your enemy feeds you ice cream while your own people eat potato peels, when prisoners live better than free citizens, when luxury comes from captivity while homeland offers only hunger, that's when you realize the propaganda wasn't just wrong, the strange cruelty of being treated well by the enemy." "No," she said finally. "They followed the rules. They were correct." Her mother nodded, relieved. "Good. I worried. The stories we heard during the war about how they'd treat prisoners were lies," Greta interrupted. "Mama, everything was lies." Her mother's face aged 10 years in that moment. Later that week, Greta stood in line for ration cards. The allowances were pitiful. Bread that was more sawdust than grain, a tiny portion of margarine that barely qualified as fat, potatoes if you were lucky. The woman in line ahead of her complained bitterly. "They're starving us. The occupation forces take everything good and leave us scraps." Greta said nothing. But she thought about ice cream, pink and white and chocolate brown, melting in the Louisiana heat, given casually to prisoners on Tuesday afternoons because it was hot outside. The woman was wrong. The Americans weren't starving Germany. Germany had starved itself years ago when it chose total war over human limits. The occupation forces were following the same rules they'd followed in the prison camps, correct, careful, meticulous. It just felt cruel because Germany had forgotten what adequacy looked like, had forgotten that there was a level between abundance and starvation. had lost the ability to exist in the normal space that other nations occupied. Ice cream, that's what had taught her. Not lectures or re-education films or denazification programs. Ice cream. The casual luxury of frozen dessert had shown her more about power and systems and ideology than any argument could have. Greta Hoffmann became a teacher. History and civics in a gymnasium in Stuttgart. She spent 35 years in a classroom, teaching German children about the war, about the Reich, about what had happened and why. But once a year, always in July, always on a hot day, she'd tell them about ice cream. The students would fidget at first, confused. Ice cream? What did ice cream have to do with World War II? She'd describe the cart rolling across the compound, the musical tinkling of ice against metal. It was backwards. We weren't losing to weakness. We were losing to strength so vast it could afford to be kind. Greta Hoffmann died in 1989, 6 months before the Berlin Wall fell. In her will, she left her diary to the Stuttgart City Archives. It's there now, preserved in climate-controlled storage, fragile pages filled with careful handwriting. July 28, 1945 is marked with a small drawing, a crude sketch of an ice cream cone, colored pink with a pencil. Underneath, a single sentence. Today, I learned what losing really means. It tastes like strawberries.